Okay, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the difference between plant and animal cells. And what you should have with you is your plant and animal cell sheet so that as I go through the video, you can write down definitions of certain vocab terms that I share with you, and you can also label the diagram that you have in front of you on your sheet. So before we actually look at a plant and animal cell, we actually have to talk about how there's two different types of cells. And these are actually labeled at the top of your sheet. So we actually have two types of cells. One is called a prokaryotic cell, and one is called a eukaryotic cell. And if you look at the two diagrams, you can tell there's a lot of differences. Looking at a eukaryotic cell, and we'll define it in a second, you see that there are many more structures inside the cell. And I erased some of them, but the diagram still has some, but there's a ton of things on the inside. And the big one is this big structure right here, which we're going to label later, and it's called the nucleus. On the other side, your prokaryotic cell is very simple. There's very few structures inside, and if anything, you just have this material in the middle, but there's no nucleus, there's no other major cell parts. It's a pretty simple organism. So, big differences I want you to define on your sheet is that a eukaryotic cell are cells with a nucleus, and in that nucleus it contains the genetic material, which is also known as DNA, and which we'll come to learn. DNA makes you very different from me and very different from every other person on this earth, and it's also what makes all organisms very different. Also, in a eukaryotic cell you have organelles. Organelles, you can think of them as like organs in your body. They're the organs in a cell. And what they are, the definition is they are internal parts of a cell, and they each perform specific functions, or they each have jobs. And what we're going to do through this video is we're going to identify some of the parts and describe what they do. So before we do that, we just have to quickly define what a prokaryotic cell is. And a prokaryotic cell are cells that do not have a nucleus, so they're missing that large structure in the middle, but the genetic material, or the DNA, is actually stored in the middle in the cytoplasm, and we'll learn what the cytoplasm is in a minute. But you can see, again, you can see all these loose strings and strands in the middle. That's your genetic material, and it's just kind of stored in this light green or light blue stuff called cytoplasm. Alright, so we're going to move on now, and in front of you you have your diagram of a plant cell, and it's a little more simple than the diagrams we just looked at, but it has some major structures in it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to label the structures just like you have in front of you, and what I'd like you to do is not only label the diagram itself, but underneath the diagram there are the vocabulary terms, and what I'd like you to do is write the definitions on those lines. And a lot of these organelles have nicknames, and I want you to make sure that you write down these nicknames as well, because that's how we try to remember these. So the first part of the cell is called the cytoplasm. I've already mentioned the cytoplasm, and the cytoplasm is this jelly-like material that holds everything in place inside the cell. And what I like to nickname it as is the jelly mold. Whoops. Let's go back so you can see that. So we call it the jelly mold, and you saw the picture, but if you've ever had a jelly mold, it's that, jelly-like sticky material, and it has all those pieces of fruit in it. Same idea with a cell. Alright, the cytoplasm is this light green material, and it has all the organelles, right, or all the pieces sitting inside of it. So if we go to the next picture, again, here's our jelly mold with, if these were organelles, they'd all be sitting inside the cytoplasm. And I haven't had one of these in a long time, but those nasty red cherries don't taste very good. Alright, moving on. Next structure, alright, is called the cell membrane. Alright, and in the plant cell, it's that yellow perimeter. And the cell membrane is the protective covering, and the cell membrane actually has a very important job because it controls what comes into the cell and what goes out. And the nickname of the cell membrane is the traffic cop. if you've ever been on a busy street, and there's no street light to control the traffic. You actually have an individual out there directing traffic, and so these two guys here, all right, take their job way too serious, but if they're out there in the middle of traffic all day long, they got to at least entertain people. So these guys are getting into it. But same idea as your cell membrane. It controls what it lets certain things in, and it keeps certain things out. All right, our next organelle is the nucleus. And the nucleus, in this diagram, it has a couple parts, but it's that main purple structure in the middle. And the nucleus is very important because it stores the genetic material, or the DNA. Right? And the DNA controls the function of the whole cell. It's very important. We nickname the nucleus the control center because it does really control everything that goes on within the cell. And the DNA is kind of like the instructions. It's the instruction manual that the control center follows and tells all the other organelles what to do. And so here's our picture of a control center. Guys working hard, computer screens everywhere, all kinds of different manuals and directions and things they have to keep track of. Same idea for your nucleus, right? And that job is done by the DNA. All right, moving on. Next structure. We have these yellow folds that are on the outside of the nucleus, but on those folds you can barely see these tiny, tiny blue dots. And those tiny blue dots are called ribosomes. And what the ribosomes do is they build proteins. They make proteins. So they have a very simple nickname, the protein factories. All right? Proteins similar to what you would get when you eat certain foods, but they actually do more for the cell, and we'll learn a little bit about it later. But all you have to really remember is that those little dots make proteins. And so there are protein factories, so here's our picture of a factory, and we can just envision that that's how they make proteins. Okay. Next, those yellow folds that all those blue dots, all those ribosomes are connected to, is called the endoplasmic reticulum. And the endoplasmic reticulum works together with the ribosomes, and it actually moves those proteins and other materials. So what we're going to learn is that this is like one big assembly line. Everything has a job, and they each work together. So the endoplasmic reticulum is called the cell highway because the ribosomes make the proteins, and then they move the proteins and other materials throughout the cell on like a highway. And so I found a great picture of this crazy intersection of highways, and it kind of looks like the endoplasmic reticulum, where there's a whole bunch of folds all interconnected and winding. So hopefully this helps you remember it. All right. Next up is, on your diagram, you should have these 3 little circles or 4 little circles up in the top left, and those are called vesicles. And again, everything's working together. So the vesicles transport the materials from the ER, or the endoplasmic reticulum, to this next organelle called the Golgi Apparatus. So ribosomes make proteins, endoplasmic reticulum moves the proteins to the vesicles, which then transport those proteins to the Golgi Apparatus, and we call it the delivery truck. Here's our delivery truck. Okay. So those proteins and other materials go from the ribosomes to the endoplasmic reticulum to the vesicles to the Golgi Apparatus. And the Golgi Apparatus kind of looks like the endoplasmic reticulum. It's like these folds of material. And what the job of the Golgi Apparatus is to take those proteins and other materials and package them up. Again, if it's like an assembly line, you have all these different series of events which put things together, and at the end, it all gets packaged up. And so that's what happens in the cell, all right, in the Golgi Apparatus, and we nickname it the finisher. And so here we have an assembly line, a whole bunch of different jobs are done, but eventually everything gets put in the box, and it gets all wrapped up and ready to go. All right, and that's basically the end of our assembly line. This next structure kind of works on its own, and it's called the mitochondria. And the mitochondria has an extremely important job, and what it is is it uses oxygen, and we'll learn a little bit more about how it gets oxygen later, but it uses oxygen to produce energy. And the process is called cellular respiration, which you may have heard of during our pretest. And because the mitochondria uses oxygen to produce energy, we call it the powerhouse. Because it makes energy, it makes power. And I found a picture from my college days that I thought you'd get a kick out of when I was in really good shape. So maybe you can figure out which one was me. Big powerhouse. All right. These next three organelles, okay, or cell parts, are only, I'm going to pause it, okay, and I put a star next to them, and there's a star next to them on your worksheet. These three are only found in a plant cell, all right? You will not find these three structures in an animal cell. So please make sure you pay attention to that, put a star next to it. And the first one is the cell wall, and it's this tough outer covering that's on the outside of the cell membrane, and what it does is it provides support and structure and shape to the plant cell. All right. The next structure that's found only in a plant cell is called the chloroplast. And again, put a star next to it. And what the chloroplast does, is, this should sound familiar, is it uses energy from the sun, right, to make food for the plant, but actually that food is sugar. It makes sugar. And that sugar is called glucose. And the process which the plant goes through is called photosynthesis. All right. We'll come to understand what photosynthesis is later, and glucose and all that other stuff, but key thing is chloroplast uses sunlight to make sugar. Okay. And the final structure that's in a plant cell is called the central vacuole. And the central vacuole is that large blue structure, almost looks like a pool, and that's what it kind of is, because it actually stores water and other waste materials that the plant may create. All right. So these are all the structures that are found in a plant cell. Many of them are also found in an animal cell, except those last three: the cell wall, the chloroplast, and the central vacuole. Okay. So now what you're going to do is, once you have all that information written down, we're going to go to the other side of your paper, and we see a diagram of an animal cell. Okay. And so what we're going to do here, hopefully this is a little bit easier, but we're going to label the parts that are in an animal cell. A lot of them are the same. And all you really have to do is label the parts on your diagram, and then below, instead of writing the definition, all I want you to do is write the nickname. If you want to write the definition because it'll help you remember it, that's totally fine. But for my purposes, when I check your sheet, you at least need to have the nickname written down. All right, so we're going to kind of go in the same order. And the first structure is the cytoplasm, which in this diagram is the pink stuff. And remember, the cytoplasm is the jello mold. All right, no pictures this time. Okay, second structure is the cell membrane, and again, that's the outer covering. All right, it's that light tan color that's all around the outside of the cell. And remember that the cell membrane is called the traffic cop because it controls what comes in and what goes out. Third structure is our nucleus, and again, that's the whole purple structure on the inside. And remember that the nucleus is extremely important, probably the most important structure, because it contains the DNA, and which controls the cell. So again, the nucleus is called the control center. All right. Now we kind of go to our assembly line, and so we move to those blue dots that are around the yellow folds, and again, those blue dots are the ribosomes. All right. And remember that the ribosomes, those are our protein factories. All right. And the proteins are made by the ribosomes, and then the proteins are moved by the endoplasmic reticulum, which again are all those yellow folds, and you see some above the nucleus and below it. Right? And we nickname the endoplasmic reticulum the cell highway because it's moving the proteins and other materials. All right? And those proteins are eventually moved from the endoplasmic reticulum to the vesicles. The vesicles pick them up, and they deliver them from the endoplasmic reticulum, those yellow structures, to the Golgi apparatus, which in this picture are those pink folds. And we're going to label the one on the right side. and there's our Golgi apparatus. And this is the last part of our assembly line. And the Golgi apparatus we call it the finisher because it finishes processing and packaging those proteins and other materials. All right. The last structure that is similar in an animal cell, just like a plant cell, are those blue, I guess, hot dog looking or sausage looking structures. And those, again, those are the mitochondria. And again, the mitochondria, all right, is nicknamed the powerhouse because it uses oxygen to make energy. All right, it makes all the energy for the cell and actually any energy for your body. Okay, so those are all the same exact structures that are in a plant cell. All right, there's only one structure that's in an animal cell that is not in the plant cell, and I'm going to actually go to a new slide. And that last one are those red circles, and they're called lysosomes. All right, so what I'd like you to do for lysosomes is at the bottom, I do want you to write the definition of a lysosome. All right, it doesn't have a nickname. Well, actually, no, it does. But the lysosome's job is it breaks down any waste material, all right, that is in the animal cell. Okay, and so we nickname it the digestion center. It's very late right now making this video. So hopefully you were able to keep up. The nice thing about it, you can rewind and go back and check your notes. But when you come into school on Monday, you need to have both diagrams labeled. All of the definitions of the organelles on the plant cell side, those should all be written down. And then on the animal cell side of the sheet, you need to at least have the nicknames. If you want to write the definitions again for your own good, go ahead. But on Monday, I'm going to check this, and then we're going to do a lab, and we're going to look at real animal and real plant cells.